INFJs don't grieve the loss of people. They grieve the loss of what was real between them. And most people never understand the difference. Something has changed in the way people connect with each other. Not suddenly, gradually, over years, in a direction that most people sense but cannot fully name. Conversations that used to go somewhere now stay on the surface, by design. Relationships that used to require sustained presence and mutual investment now operate through brief digital exchanges that simulate closeness without producing it. The infrastructure of modern social life has become extraordinarily efficient at generating the appearance of connection, while systematically removing the conditions that make real connection possible. Most people feel this as a vague dissatisfaction, a sense that something is missing without being able to identify exactly what. They feel lonely in ways that do not respond to more socializing. They feel disconnected in relationships that look fine from the outside. They cannot explain the specific quality of what is absent, because they have never had precise language for what real connection actually requires. For the INFJ, this is not a vague dissatisfaction. It is a specific, acute, deeply felt loss. Because the INFJ's entire experience of being alive is organized around the quality of connection they have access to. Not the quantity, never the quantity. The depth, the realness, the specific quality of genuine human contact that reaches past the performance and arrives at something true. When that quality of connection becomes increasingly rare, when the cultural environment moves systematically away from the conditions that produce it, the INFJ does not just feel the loss in the abstract. They feel it in every interaction that falls short, in every relationship that stays on the surface, in every moment when they reach for something real and find a simulation of it instead. Here is what makes this particularly hard for INFJs. They are not experiencing the collapse of connection as a cultural observation from a distance. They are experiencing it from inside the most sensitive possible nervous system, with the highest possible threshold for what connection actually means, in a world that is increasingly organized around a version of connection that does not meet that threshold. It does not just miss them, it misses them precisely. And that precision of missing is something this video is going to name, layer by layer, for exactly what it is. If this channel has been giving language to things you have felt for years without being able to say, subscribe. Because this is exactly what we do here. Let's get into it. 1. The INFJ requires conditions for connection that modern life systematically destroys. Real connection, the kind the INFJ needs, not just prefers, requires specific conditions. It requires time that is not optimized for productivity. It requires physical or sustained presence, not managed availability through devices. It requires a quality of attention that is not divided across multiple simultaneous inputs. It requires a willingness to enter uncertainty together, to have a conversation that does not know where it is going, and to stay in it anyway. It requires both people to be sufficiently present to their own interior, that they have something real to bring, rather than a performance of having something real. These are the conditions under which genuine depth becomes available, under which the kind of exchange the INFJ needs is even possible. Modern life has systematically dismantled most of these conditions. Not through malice, through optimization. The same forces that made everything faster and more convenient and more connected in the superficial sense also eliminated the specific kinds of space in which authentic connection develops. The long meal without phones. The conversation that went somewhere unexpected because nobody was managing how they were perceived in real time. The friendship that deepened over years of showing up, rather than months of digital exchanges. The silence between people that was comfortable, rather than something to be filled with content. What replaced these things is not nothing. It is something real, but fundamentally different. Digital communication that is always available, but never fully present. Social environments optimized for maximum interaction and minimum vulnerability. A cultural emphasis on personal brand that makes genuine exposure, showing the unpolished, uncertain, unfinished version of yourself, feel like a strategic liability rather than the prerequisite for actual closeness. For the average person, this shift produced a decrease in connection quality that registers as vague dissatisfaction. For the INFJ, it produced something closer to an environment where the thing they need most has become structurally unavailable in most of the spaces they move through. Not impossible, real connection still exists, real depth is still findable, but the ambient social environment, the background level of human interaction that most people's lives are built around, has moved so far from what the INFJ needs that every ordinary interaction now requires the INFJ to navigate the distance between what is available and what they actually need. And navigating that distance every day in every interaction is exhausting in a way that compounds invisibly over time. 2. Surface-level connection doesn't just fail to satisfy the INFJ, it actually drains them. This is something most people do not understand about the INFJ's experience of modern social interaction. And it is one of the things that makes the current cultural moment particularly costly for this type. Most people find surface-level connection insufficient. They would prefer depth, but surface connection at least provides some baseline of social contact that takes the edge off the human need for belonging. It is not ideal, but it is something. It fills the minimum requirement. For the INFJ, surface connection does not fill the minimum requirement. It actively depletes them. And this is not a preference. It is a function of how the INFJ's nervous system processes social interaction. The INFJ's system does not have a surface gear. When they are with people, they are running the full processing load, tracking the subtext, absorbing the emotional undercurrent, noticing the gap between what is being said and what is being felt. All of that processing happens whether the conversation has depth or not, whether the interaction is real or performed, whether anything genuine is being exchanged or not. So the INFJ in a surface social environment is doing all the work of deep processing and receiving none of the return. They are spending the full cost of social interaction while the interaction provides nothing that actually reaches the place where they need to be reached. The transaction is entirely negative. They leave depleted without having received anything that offsets the depletion. And when this is the structure of most available social interaction, the math does not work. The INFJ's social environment is costing them more than it is giving them on a chronic, daily, ambient basis. This is why many INFJs in the current cultural moment are withdrawing, not because they have given up on connection, but because the cost-benefit calculation of most available social interaction is genuinely unsustainable. They are not antisocial. They are protecting a limited resource from environments that take it without returning anything. And the tragedy is that withdrawal from unsatisfying social interaction further reduces the already small number of opportunities for the real connection they need, creating a cycle that is difficult to identify from the inside and nearly impossible to explain to people who do not experience social interaction the way the INFJ does. 3. The INFJ grieves simulated connection differently than most people. When a relationship ends, or more specifically, when the INFJ realizes that what they thought was a genuine connection was a simulation of one, the grief they experience is not proportional to the length of the relationship or the obvious investment in it. It is proportional to the depth of what they believed was real. And this distinction matters enormously, because it means the INFJ can grieve the loss of something that by most external measures was not a significant relationship, while appearing relatively unbothered by the end of something that looked more substantial. The INFJ does not grieve people, they grieve realness. When they lose a connection that had genuine depth, genuine mutual recognition, genuine moments of being actually seen, they lose something specific and irreplaceable. Not the person as a collection of characteristics, not the relationship as a set of shared experiences, but the quality of being real with someone, the specific texture of a connection that reached past the performance. And because that quality is rare, because most connections never reach it, losing one of the few that did produces a grief that is disproportionate to every external measure and entirely proportionate to the actual interior cost. What makes this grief particularly complicated in the current cultural moment is that the INFJ is increasingly encountering what might be called simulated depth, connections that have the surface markers of real connection without the underlying reality. The person who asks meaningful questions but uses the answers for social performance rather than genuine interest. The relationship that produces the feeling of being understood because the other person is good at mirroring without actually reaching anything real. The digital connection that generates consistent emotional engagement without ever arriving at the quality of presence that actual depth requires. The INFJ's perceptiveness eventually identifies the simulation, not always quickly. The INFJ wants real connection enough that they can be slower to see its absence than their perception would usually allow. But they do see it, and when they do, the grief is not just for the relationship, it is for the time spent believing it was real, for the interior they opened to something that turned out to be a reflection rather than a response, for the specific exhaustion of having invested fully in something that was not what it appeared to be. 4. Phones in the room. Why divided attention is a form of rejection the INFJ feels physically. This point is specific, and it might seem small relative to everything else in this video, but it is one of the most consistently reported experiences of INFJs in the current cultural moment. And it illuminates something important about why the collapse of authentic connection hits this type so differently than others. When the INFJ is in a genuine conversation with someone, or attempting to be, and that person is intermittently checking their phone, the INFJ does not experience this as a minor social rudeness. They experience it as something closer to rejection. Not dramatic, not something they necessarily show, but in their body, as a specific withdrawal of something that mattered. Because for the INFJ, genuine conversation requires genuine presence, not divided presence, not presence with a background awareness of what else might be arriving. Full presence. And the phone in the room, regardless of how often it is actually checked, is a permanent announcement that this conversation is not the only thing happening, that the present moment is not enough to hold someone's complete attention. The reason this registers as rejection rather than rudeness is connected to how the INFJ experiences connection neurologically. For the INFJ, being truly present with someone, offering full undivided attention, is not a courtesy. It is the substance of connection itself. It is what makes the interaction real rather than performative. When they offer that quality of presence and receive divided presence in return, the asymmetries registers immediately and specifically in the nervous system, not as an intellectual observation, but as a felt sense of something being withheld, of not being worth the full attention, of the performance of connection being offered in place of the real thing. Multiply this by the ambient reality of a world in which divided attention is the default mode of almost all social interaction, and what the INFJ is experiencing on a daily basis is a chronic background of not quite being met, of reaching for something real and consistently finding something that has the shape of it, but not the substance. Over time, this chronic background, this accumulation of almost connections and divided presences and performances of engagement, produces a specific kind of relational fatigue that the INFJ cannot easily explain to others because the individual instances do not justify the accumulated weight. It is the weight of the pattern that costs, and most people never see the pattern. 5. The specific pain of watching people choose performance over reality. One of the most consistent and most quietly painful experiences of the INFJ in the current cultural moment is watching people choose the performance of connection over the reality of it. Not because people are malicious, they are almost never malicious, but because the cultural incentive structure has been reorganized around performance in a way that most people have not consciously chosen and are not fully aware of. The social media version of a friendship that replaced the actual friendship. The carefully curated vulnerability that generates engagement rather than the messy, uncertain, real vulnerability that generates actual closeness. The group chat that simulates community while everyone in it is fundamentally alone. The INFJ sees all of this with a precision that most people do not bring to it, not because they are superior, but because the gap between performance and reality is something their nervous system detects automatically and cannot turn off. They are not looking for the performance, they are just constitutionally unable to stop noticing it when it is there. And right now it is everywhere. In every social environment, at every level, the performance of connection has become so normalized that the real version is increasingly difficult to find and increasingly strange when it arrives. What makes this painful in a specific way is that the INFJ remembers what real felt like. They have had enough genuine moments, enough instances of actual mutual recognition, actual depth, actual presence, to have a precise internal reference for what is missing. They are not sad in the abstract. They are sad about the specific gap between what is available and what they know from experience is possible, between the simulation that is everywhere and the reality that is rare. And they carry the additional burden of not being able to share this grief clearly, because pointing at the performance and naming it as performance sounds critical of people who are doing their genuine best within a cultural structure they did not design. The INFJ does not want to criticize. They want what was possible before the performance became the default, and they are increasingly unsure how to find it in a world that has largely forgotten what it looked like. 6. How the INFJ protects what remains of real connection in a world that has largely abandoned it. The INFJ who has felt the collapse of authentic connection clearly enough, who has named what is missing and why the available substitutes do not serve, eventually makes a set of decisions that look, from the outside, like social withdrawal, but are actually something more precise. They are not withdrawing from people, they are withdrawing from performance. They are making deliberate choices about where they put the limited resource of their full presence. And those choices are based on a clear-eyed assessment of where real connection is actually available versus where its simulation will be offered instead. This means the INFJ's social world becomes smaller, not impoverished, smaller in a way that is deliberate and that serves the quality of what remains. They invest deeply in the few relationships that have demonstrated the capacity for real depth and largely disengage from the ambient social activity that costs them without returning anything real. They become more protective of their time and energy, not because they have become selfish, but because they have become honest about the difference between what nourishes them and what depletes them. They also become more intentional about creating the conditions for real connection in the interactions they do choose. The long conversation with the phone put away, the question that goes somewhere uncomfortable because the comfortable version would only produce a performance of an answer. The willingness to be genuinely uncertain out loud, to bring the unresolved, unpolished real version of something, rather than the version that is ready for an audience. These choices require a kind of courage that is not dramatic but is consistent, because the cultural default, the performance of connection, the managed presentation, the optimized social interaction, is always the easier choice. The real version requires exposure. It requires the possibility of not being received the way you hoped. It requires being actually present rather than strategically visible. And the INFJ who keeps making that choice, in a world that has largely stopped making it, is not being idealistic. They are being, in the most literal sense, the last person in a lot of rooms who is still trying to make something real happen. And that is both admirable and extraordinarily lonely. 7. What the INFJ's experience of this collapse points to, and why it matters beyond the INFJ. Everything in this video has been about the INFJ experience specifically. But this final point steps back from the specific and looks at what the INFJ's experience points to in a larger sense. Because the INFJ is not suffering from a unique malfunction, they are not experiencing something that is only relevant to the small percentage of the population that identifies with this type. They are experiencing, at maximum sensitivity and minimum tolerance for substitution, something that is happening to everyone. And their experience is a precise diagnostic of exactly what is being lost. most people feel the collapse of authentic connection as a background malaise, a sense that something is missing that they cannot quite name, a loneliness that does not respond to more socializing, a hunger that more content, more digital engagement, more optimized social interaction does not feed. They feel it, but the feeling does not have enough precision to point at its source clearly. The INFJ feels it with enough precision to name the source exactly. They know what is missing because they know what it felt like when it was present. They know the difference between performance and reality in human connection because their nervous system will not let them pretend the difference does not exist. They know that what is being offered in place of real connection, the efficiency, the convenience, the managed engagement, is not a lesser version of the same thing. It is a different thing entirely, and it does not meet the human need it appears to be designed to meet. This means the INFJ's grief, their specific acute, often lonely experience of living in a cultural moment that has largely abandoned the conditions for real connection, is not a personal problem to be managed. It is a signal. It points at something real that matters for everyone, not just for the people sensitive enough to feel it most acutely. The world does not need the INFJ to become more tolerant of simulation. It needs more people to feel the difference as clearly as the INFJ feels it, and to start making the choices, however small and however costly, that keep something real alive in the spaces they inhabit. The INFJ who refuses to settle for the simulation is not being difficult. They are being, in a very specific way, necessary. 7 layers of something that most people sense vaguely and the INFJ feels precisely. The collapse of authentic connection is not just a personal experience, it is a cultural reality. And the INFJ, whose entire experience of being alive depends on the quality of human contact they have access to, feels that reality at a depth that most people never reach. You are not too sensitive for this world. You are precisely sensitive enough to see clearly what this world is losing. And that clarity, however painful, is one of the most important things you carry. Brainy Quiet Mind, subscribe. Share this with someone who has been feeling the loss without having the words for what exactly is missing. One question for the comments, answer it honestly. When was the last time you had a conversation that was genuinely real, where nothing was performed and something true was actually exchanged? And how long ago was it?